The dust-filled air of Cottonwood Springs carried the sounds of a struggle as two burly deputies dragged a young woman down the main street toward the sheriff's office. Her white wedding dress, now torn and smudged with dirt, fluttered in the hot Arizona breeze of 1885 as she fought against their grip. "I didn't steal anything," she screamed, her voice raw with desperation as curious onlookers gathered to witness the spectacle. "That man is a liar." Josie Moore had never imagined her wedding day would end like this, being hauled to jail in the dress she'd spent months sewing by hand. The golden afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she stumbled over the uneven ground, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins, tears streaming down her face. Inside the Rusty Spur saloon, Zachary Larson looked up from his whiskey at the commotion outside. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy had just arrived in town after a long cattle drive, intending to enjoy a quiet drink before finding a room for the night. Instead, his attention was captured by the woman in white being manhandled down the street. "What's happening out there?" he asked the bartender, setting down his glass. The old man wiped a rag across the worn wooden counter. "Looks like Sheriff Thompson caught himself another thief. Been a rash of robberies lately. That poor girl's probably the latest suspect." Zach frowned, his green eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold. Something about the woman's desperate pleas stirred something in him. She didn't look like any thief he'd ever encountered. "That's Bill Hargrove's would-be bride," the bartender continued, leaning closer. "Heard they were supposed to get hitched today, but something went wrong. Real wrong, apparently." Zach tossed back the rest of his whiskey and stood, adjusting his worn leather vest. "Guess I'll go see what's what." By the time he reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered outside. Through the dusty window, he could see the woman sitting on a bench, her head in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. The sheriff, a portly man with a thick mustache and weathered face, was writing in a ledger at his desk. Zach pushed through the door, his spurs jangling as he entered. The sheriff looked up, irritation crossing his face. "Something I can help you with, stranger?" "Just curious about what's going on," Zach replied, tipping his hat back. "Not every day you see a bride dragged to jail." The woman lifted her tear-stained face, and Zach felt a jolt run through him. Despite her disheveled appearance, she was strikingly beautiful, high cheekbones, full lips, and the most expressive brown eyes he'd ever seen. "This ain't no concern of yours," Sheriff Thompson said gruffly. "Miss Moore here is being charged with theft. Bill Hargrove claims she stole his grandmother's ruby brooch, family heirloom worth a small fortune." "I didn't steal anything," Josie protested again, her voice breaking. "He's only saying that because I refused to marry him when I discovered what kind of man he truly is." The sheriff sighed heavily. "That's for the judge to decide when he comes through next week. Until then, you'll be staying in my jail cell." Josie paled. "A week, but I have nowhere to go even if I could post bail. My father's farm is 3 days' ride from here, and Bill made sure everyone in town believes I'm a thief." Something in Zach stirred a protective instinct he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the desperation in her eyes or the obvious injustice of the situation. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a connection he felt the moment their eyes met. "How much is her bail?" he heard himself asking before he'd fully formed the thought. The sheriff looked at him in surprise. $50, but like I said, this ain't your concern, cowboy." Zach reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out $50, nearly half of what he'd earned on the cattle drive, and placed it on the desk with a decisive thud. "It is now," he said firmly. "She's mine." The room fell silent. Josie stared at him, confusion and wariness replacing some of the despair in her eyes. "And who exactly are you?" the sheriff asked, not reaching for the money. "Name's Zachary Larson. Just finished a drive from Texas with the Cunningham outfit." He nodded toward the money. "That should cover it." The sheriff looked between Zach and Josie suspiciously. "You two know each other?" Before Josie could speak, Zach cut in smoothly. "We're old acquaintances. I'm surprised to find her here, but I can't leave a friend in trouble." Josie opened her mouth, closed it, then gave an almost imperceptible nod. The sheriff still looked doubtful but reached for the money. "Fine, But she stays in town until the judge arrives, and she's your responsibility now, Larson. Any more trouble and you'll both end up behind bars. After some paperwork and stern warnings, Zach led Josie outside. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows down the dusty street as curious onlookers whispered among themselves. Once they were a safe distance from the sheriff's office, Josie stopped and turned to face him. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, arms crossed defensively over her chest. "You don't know me, you have no idea if I'm guilty or not." Zach studied her face, taking in the strength behind her tears. "Are you guilty? I mean, no," she said firmly, lifting her chin. "I am not a thief." He nodded, believing her without knowing why. "Then that's good enough for me. No one should spend a week in jail for something they didn't do. But $50, she began, looking troubled. "That's a lot of money, and what did you mean by saying I'm yours?" Zach's weathered face flushed slightly. "Just something to say to convince the sheriff. I don't own you or expect anything in return, just couldn't stand by and watch an innocent woman thrown in jail." Josie's stance softened slightly, but wariness remained in her eyes. "I appreciate what you did, Mr. Larson, but I have nowhere to go. My reputation in this town is ruined." Her voice caught. "The room above the general store where I was staying belongs to Bill's cousin. I can't go back there." Zach glanced down the street, thinking. "Let's get something to eat first. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Then we'll figure out what to do next." He led her to a small cafe at the edge of town, aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Inside, the proprietor, a plump woman named Mrs. Jenkins, raised her eyebrows at Josie's wedding dress but seated them at a corner table without comment. Over bowls of beef stew and cornbread, Josie gradually told Zach her story. She'd come to Cottonwood Springs 6 months ago to work as a seamstress after her mother died. Bill Hargrove, the son of the local banker, had courted her persistently, and with few prospects and her father struggling to keep their small farm, she'd eventually agreed to marry him. "Everything seemed fine until last week," she explained, pushing her food around. "I overheard him talking with his friends about how once we were married, he planned to sell my father's land out from under him. He'd already arranged it with his father." Her knuckles whitened around her spoon. "When I confronted him this morning before the ceremony, he became enraged. I told him I couldn't marry a man who would do that to my family, to anyone. That's when he accused me of stealing the brooch." Zach listened quietly, his jaw tightening as she spoke. "Your father doesn't know about any of this," Josie shook her head. "He's been ill. I didn't want to worry him with my problems. I was planning to write to him once I figured out what to do next." "And what is your plan now?" She set down her spoon with a sigh. "I don't know. Even if the judge believes me over Bill, my reputation here is destroyed. No one will hire me now." Zach considered this as he finished his stew. An idea was forming in his mind, crazy, perhaps, but he couldn't shake it. "I have a small ranch about 2 days' ride north of here. It's not much, but I've been building it up for the past 3 years. There's a cabin that needs some work, but it's shelter." Josie's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a place to stay? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "You need somewhere safe until this mess gets sorted out. I'm offering you that, nothing more." She studied him suspiciously. "Why would you help a stranger this way?" Zach thought about it, then shrugged. "My ma always said to help those in need when you can." "Maybe I'll need help someday and someone will remember my example." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I could use some help with the place. It's not exactly homey yet." Josie was silent for a long moment, weighing her limited options. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Larson. I accept your offer, but only until the judge arrives and clears my name. Then I'll find my own way." "Call me Zach," he said, extending his hand across the table. "And it's a deal." She hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. "Josie." As their hands met, neither realized they were setting in motion events that would change both their lives forever. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Zach had secured a room for Josie at the boarding house on the outskirts of town, run by a widow who was new enough to Cottonwood Springs that she wasn't fully aware of the scandal. He'd spent the night in the livery stable with his horse, giving Josie space and time to think. When he met her outside the boarding house at sunrise, She had changed out of her wedding dress into a simple blue calico dress and had packed her few belongings in a small cloth bag. Her hair was braided neatly, and though her eyes were tired, she seemed more composed than the day before. "I left a note for the sheriff, telling him where I'll be staying until the judge arrives," she said as he helped her onto the spare horse he'd purchased that morning. "I don't want him thinking I've fled." Zach nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking, ready to ride." As they rode out of town, Josie kept glancing back nervously. "What if Bill comes after us? He's not the type to let things go." "Let him try," Zach said calmly, though his hand rested near his holstered revolver. "But I doubt he will." Men like that prefer to hide behind their daddy's money and influence rather than face things head-on. The journey north took them through rugged, beautiful country. Pine forests gave way to sweeping valleys dotted with cottonwoods and sagebrush. They camped the first night beside a small creek, where Zach caught fish for their dinner while Josie gathered wild onions and berries to supplement the meal. As they sat by the fire that evening, Josie studied her unlikely rescuer. In the flickering light, his strong profile was accentuated the straight nose, firm jaw, and thoughtful eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the night chill. Zach poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "It's 80 acres in a valley with a year-round spring, good grazing land. I've got a small herd, started 30 head of cattle and a few horses. The cabin needs work, like I said, but it's solid. Built it myself." "How did you come to own land at your age?" she asked. Most cowboys she'd known were perpetually broke, drifting from job to job. A shadow crossed his face. "My older brother and I planned to build it together. He died in the war, Gettysburg. Left me his savings, and I added mine from years of driving cattle. Took me 7 years to save enough for the land." "I'm sorry about your brother," Josie said softly. He nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. "What about you?" "Always been a seamstress, my mother taught me. She was the best seamstress in 3 counties before she got sick." Pride and sorrow mingled in her voice. "After she died, I took over her work to help support the farm. My father grows corn and wheat, not enough to make us rich, but enough to get by in good years." They talked late into the night, sharing pieces of their lives, finding unexpected common ground. Both had lost loved ones. Both valued hard work and independence. Both had dreams that seemed just out of reach in a harsh world. When they finally settled down to sleep on opposite sides of the fire, Josie felt a strange sense of comfort despite her uncertain circumstances. There was something about Zachary Larson that made her feel safe, a steadiness she'd never sensed in Bill Hargrove, despite all his wealth and promises. The second day of travel brought them into higher country, where aspen trees shimmered with golden leaves and the air carried the first hint of autumn crispness. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge and Zach reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. "Larson Ranch." Josie followed his gaze. The valley spread out like a green carpet, bisected by a small river that gleamed in the sunlight. A modest cabin stood near a cluster of cottonwood trees, with a barn and corral nearby. A small herd of cattle grazed peacefully on the distant slopes. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Something in his expression softened with pride and perhaps relief at her approval. "It's a work in progress." That was an understatement, Josie discovered when they reached the cabin. While solidly built, it was sparse inside a table and 2 chairs, a cast iron stove, a narrow bed in the corner, and little else. The floor was swept clean, but dust covered most surfaces, and spider webs decorated the corners of the ceiling. "I've been gone for 3 months on the cattle drive," Zach explained apologetically as he lit a lamp. "Haven't had much time for homey touches." Josie set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. "Well, that's something I can help with at least. Do you have any spare blankets?" "I can make up a pallet for myself by the stove." Zach shook his head. "You take the bed, I'll sleep in the barn until we can figure out something better." She started to protest, but he cut her off gently. "I've spent more nights under the stars than under a roof, Josie. The barn is luxury compared to most places I've slept." That first evening established a pattern for the days that followed. Zach would rise before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, returning to find coffee brewing and a simple breakfast waiting. During the days, Josie cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, mended Zach's spare clothes, and began transforming the stark interior with small touches wildflowers in a jar on the table. A quilt she pieced together from scraps of fabric she found in a trunk, curtains made from an old sheet dyed with berries. Zach brought home a deer on the third day, and together they butchered it, smoking much of the meat for winter. He taught her how to shoot his rifle just in case, and she showed him how to make biscuits that didn't resemble rocks. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, talking or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. A week passed, then another. The date when the judge was supposed to arrive in Cottonwood Springs came and went, but no word reached them about Josie's case. Zach rode to the nearest trading post for supplies and to ask if there was news, but returned with nothing definitive, only rumors that the judge had been delayed by bad weather in the north. "We should go back," Josie said one evening as they sat by the fireplace. The nights were growing colder as October deepened. "I need to clear my name." Zach prodded the fire, his face thoughtful. "We will, but there's no point rushing back if the judge isn't there yet. Winter's coming. Better to prepare here where we have shelter and food than to wait in town spending money on rooms and meals." She knew he was right, but something else bothered her. "People will talk, Zach. They'll say things about us living here together." He glanced at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Does that bother you? Doesn't it bother you? Your reputation, my reputation, is as a man who minds his own business and expects others to do the same," he interrupted calmly. "Besides, anyone who matters knows the truth. The truth." Josie pondered that as she prepared for bed later. The truth was, she was starting to care for this quiet, steady man in ways that both exhilarated and terrified her. The truth was, she found herself dreading the day when her name would be cleared and she'd have no reason to stay. The truth was, she was falling in love with Zachary Larson. November arrived with the first snowfall, just a dusting that melted by midday, but a harbinger of the winter to come. Zach worked from sunrise to sunset, cutting firewood, repairing the barn roof, and ensuring the cattle had access to sheltered areas with feed. Josie helped where she could, learning tasks she'd never imagined doing on her father's farm where the men handled the livestock and heavy work. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of fence, Zach suddenly stopped and stood straight, listening. "Riders coming," he said, reaching for the rifle that was never far from his side these days. Josie shaded her eyes against the autumn sun and saw a cloud of dust on the road that led to the ranch. Her heart pounded. "Is it Bill? Can't tell yet. Get back to the cabin." She hesitated, not wanting to leave him alone, but the stern look in his eyes brooked no argument. She hurried back, keeping to the cover of trees where possible. Inside the cabin, she took down the loaded shotgun Zach had taught her to use and positioned herself by the window, watching anxiously as 3 riders approached Zach. From this distance, she couldn't hear what was said, but she could see that none of the men was Bill Hargrove. After several minutes of conversation, Zach's posture relaxed slightly, and he pointed toward the cabin. The group started walking in her direction, and Josie quickly set aside the shotgun before stepping onto the porch. As they came closer, she recognized the lead rider with surprise. "Sheriff Thompson," the sheriff tipped his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Moore, glad to see you're well." Zach climbed the porch steps to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Sheriff has news," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Thompson cleared his throat. "The judge finally made it to Cottonwood Springs last week. Bill Hargrove's story fell apart during the hearing. Seems his grandmother's brooch was found in his cousin's possession, the very cousin who'd been helping him spread rumors about you." Josie felt light-headed with relief. "So I'm cleared." "The charges are dropped," the sheriff nodded. "Judge dismissed everything, said there should never have been charges in the first place without evidence." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I owe you an apology, Miss Moore. I should have been more thorough in my investigation." "There's more," Zach said quietly, his eyes on the other two men who hung back near their horses. Sheriff Thompson gestured to the older of the two, a thin man with graying hair and tired eyes who stepped forward hesitantly. "This gentleman has been looking for you, Miss Moore." The man removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. "Josie, it's me, sweetheart." "Father," Josie whispered, hardly believing her eyes. The man before her was much thinner than when she'd last seen him, his face deeply lined with worry. "What are you doing here?" "You're supposed to be resting your heart. How could I rest when I got word my daughter was in trouble?" He climbed the steps slowly and took her hands in his. "I came as soon as I could travel. Mr. Hargrove tried to buy our land while claiming you were a criminal. When I refused and demanded to see you, he threatened me. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong." Tears filled Josie's eyes. "Oh, Father, I'm so sorry. I was trying to protect you from all this." Samuel Moore embraced his daughter tightly. "It's not your job to protect me, child. It's the other way around." He released her and turned to Zach with an appraising look. "You must be the young man who's been looking after my Josie." Zach extended his hand. "Zachary Larson, sir. Your daughter has been a guest at my ranch while awaiting the resolution of her case." Samuel shook his hand firmly. "I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Larson. The sheriff told me what you did." "No debt, sir. It was the right thing to do." The third man, who hadn't spoken yet, stepped forward. He was younger than the sheriff, with a neat mustache and the look of an educated man. "Miss Moore, I'm Edward Pierce, attorney from Prescott. Your father retained my services when he learned of your situation. I've been assisting in clearing your name." Josie looked between the three men in confusion. "How did you find me?" "I wrote to tell Father I was safe, but I never mentioned where exactly." "That would be my fault," Zach admitted. "When I went to the trading post last week, I sent a telegram to the sheriff asking about the judge's arrival. I gave my location in case there was news." Sheriff Thompson nodded. "When Mr. Moore and Mr. Pierce arrived in Cottonwood Springs demanding answers, I remembered your cowboy's message. Thought it best to deliver the news in person and bring your father to you." The visitors stayed overnight, with Zach giving up the barn to the sheriff and Mr. Pierce, while Samuel Moore took the bed inside. Zach himself slept under the stars, despite Josie's protests about the cold. The next morning, over a breakfast of venison, eggs, and biscuits, Samuel studied his daughter with a father's perceptive eye. "You look well, Josie, better than I expected after everything you've been through." She glanced at Zach, who was pouring coffee for everyone. "I've been fortunate in my friends, indeed." Samuel sipped his coffee approvingly. "So what happens now? Will you come home with me? The farm needs a woman's touch, and with this legal business settled, there's nothing keeping you away." Josie felt her heart sink at the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Zach. But what alternative was there? The reason for her stay was gone. She had no claim on Zach or his home, no right to impose any longer. "Of course, Father," she said softly, not meeting Zach's eyes. "I'll pack my things after breakfast." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock Josie had repaired. Zach set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "There's no rush, Mr. Moore. Winter's setting in. Travel will be difficult soon. You and Josie are welcome to stay until spring if you wish." Samuel exchanged a look with the lawyer, who nodded slightly. "That's generous, but I need to get back to the farm, however." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Pierce brings other news that might interest you both." The lawyer reached into his satchel and withdrew a document. It seems Bill Hargrove's dishonesty extended beyond false accusations. His father's bank has been engaging in questionable practices, including attempting to foreclose on properties illegally to acquire land for a planned railroad spur. Josie gasped. "Is that why he was so determined to get our farm?" "Precisely," Pierce confirmed. "Your father's land and several others form a corridor the railroad needs. When this came to light during the investigation into your case, the territorial governor ordered an audit of the bank. The Hargroves are facing serious charges." "What does this mean for us?" Samuel asked. "It means your farm is safe," Pierce said, "but there's more. As compensation for the damages and distress caused, the court has awarded Miss Moore a settlement." He named a sum that made Josie's eyes widen. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to make a difference. Josie sat in stunned silence. After months of having nothing, not even her reputation, she suddenly had options. She could help her father pay off the farm's debts. She could open her own seamstress shop. She could go anywhere, do almost anything, or she could stay. The thought came unbidden but felt right the moment it formed. She looked at Zach, who was staring into his coffee cup, his expression unreadable. "Father," she said carefully, "would you excuse Zach and me for a moment?" "I think we need to talk privately." Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. Mr. Pierce and I will help the sheriff saddle the horses." When they were alone, Josie and Zach stood awkwardly in the kitchen, the space that had become familiar and comfortable suddenly feeling charged with unspoken words. "So," Zach said finally, "you're a free woman, cleared of all charges and with money in your pocket. What will you do now?" Josie took a deep breath. "That depends. On what, on you?" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "These past weeks, they've meant something to me, Zach, more than I expected, more than maybe they should have." His expression softened. "They've meant something to me too, Josie. When you paid my bail that day, you told the sheriff I was yours. I know you were just saying that to convince him, but—" She faltered, then gathered her courage. "But I've been wondering if there could be truth in those words. If you might want me to stay, not as someone you rescued, but as something more." Zach moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I've been wanting to ask you to stay since about the third day you were here, but I couldn't. Not while you were here because you had nowhere else to go. Not while there was even a chance you might feel obligated because of what I did. And now," she whispered, "now you have choices. You can go anywhere, do anything." His voice deepened. "But I'm hoping you'll choose to stay here with me." Josie felt tears well in her eyes. "Is that a proposal, Zachary Larson?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Not yet. That'll come when I've had time to do it properly with a ring and maybe even a new shirt." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But it's a promise. A promise that if you stay, I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. A promise that someday, God willing, I'll make you my wife in truth, not just to fool a sheriff." Josie laughed through her tears. "Then my answer is yes. Yes, I'll stay." When Zach kissed her, it felt like coming home, a home she hadn't known she was searching for until she found it in his arms. Outside on the porch, Samuel Moore watched the kiss through the window and smiled to himself. He'd seen the way they looked at each other, recognized the signs of two hearts finding their match. It wasn't what he'd expected when he set out to find his daughter, but seeing her face alight with happiness, he couldn't wish for anything more. "Looks like we may be planning a wedding after all," he murmured to Sheriff Thompson. The sheriff chuckled. "A real one this time, and a damn sight better match than Bill Hargrove would have been." "Indeed," Samuel agreed, turning away to give the young couple privacy. "Indeed." Winter descended on the valley with a series of snowstorms that transformed the landscape into a white wonderland. With the roads often impassable, Josie's father had returned to his farm with a promise to visit in the spring, taking with him a letter from Josie to be sent to her former employer in Cottonwood Springs, requesting the rest of her belongings be forwarded when weather permitted. The cold months passed in a rhythm of work and quiet evenings. Zach tended the livestock and made improvements to the cabin, adding a second room that would serve as Josie's bedroom until they married. Josie kept house, sewed warm quilts and curtains, and began planning a garden for spring. They were careful to maintain propriety despite their engagement. Zach continued to sleep in the barn until he'd finished the addition, then moved back into the main room while Josie took the new space. The arrangement raised eyebrows among the few neighbors who visited during the winter, but Zach's solid reputation and Josie's quiet dignity soon silenced most gossip. During the long evenings, they talked of their future together, the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, their hopes for family, their dreams and fears. Josie learned that beneath Zach's quiet exterior lay a thoughtful mind and a tender heart. Zach discovered that Josie's delicate appearance belied a core of steel and determination that matched his own. By the time the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow in early March, they had fallen deeply in love, not with the desperate passion of their first meeting, but with a steady, growing affection built on shared work, mutual respect, and genuine understanding. On a mild spring day when the meadows were turning green with new growth, Samuel Moore returned as promised, bringing with him Josie's trunk from Cottonwood Springs and news from town. "The Hargroves have left," he announced over dinner. "Bank's been taken over by investors from Phoenix. Bill enlisted in the Army. Rumor has it his father forced him to choose between that or jail time for his part in the fraud." Josie felt a weight lift from her shoulders at the news. "Good riddance." "The new bank manager returned this to me," Samuel continued, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and handed it to Josie. "Said it was found in Bill's desk after he left." She opened the pouch cautiously and gasped. Inside was a ruby brooch, the very one she'd been accused of stealing. "So he had it all along," she whispered. "Planted the story about it being stolen to discredit you when you refused to marry him," Samuel confirmed. "The manager asked me to return it to Bill's grandmother, who apparently knew nothing about the accusation against you." Zach's jaw tightened. "Lucky for Bill he's far away." "I might have had something to say to him otherwise." Samuel smiled at the protective tone in the young man's voice. "I thought you might feel that way, but it's water under the bridge now." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." With the arrival of spring came increased activity on the ranch. Calving season kept Zach busy day and night, often returning to the cabin exhausted but satisfied as the herd grew. Josie planted her garden and began preparations for their wedding, which they had set for early June when the wildflowers would carpet the valley. One evening in late April, Zach returned from checking the herd to find Josie sitting on the porch steps, a letter in her hands and a troubled expression on her face. "Bad news?" he asked, sitting beside her. She handed him the letter. "It's from Mrs. Holloway in Cottonwood Springs. She's offering me a position in her dress shop, a partnership, actually. She's getting older and wants someone to eventually take over the business." Josie twisted her hands in her lap. "It's a good opportunity, Zach. Better than I ever expected when I first went there." Zach read the letter carefully, then folded it and returned it to her. "When would she want you to start?" "As soon as possible. Summer is her busiest season with weddings and such." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and pink. "Is it something you want to do?" he finally asked. Josie sighed. "I don't know. I love sewing, and having my own shop someday was always my dream, but that was before." She looked at him, her eyes troubled. "Before us, before I found a different kind of happiness here." Zach took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Josie, I would never ask you to give up your dreams for me. But the ranch is here, and Cottonwood Springs is nearly 2 days' ride away. We couldn't." "Why not?" he interrupted. "Ranches can be sold, new ones can be built." She stared at him in shock. "You would sell your ranch after everything you've put into it, after all your brother's dreams?" Zach's expression was thoughtful. "My brother dreamed of us building something together, something that would last, but he also wanted me to be happy." He squeezed her hand. "The land is just land, Josie. What matters is the life we build, wherever that may be." Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't ask you to give up everything you've worked for. You didn't ask, I'm offering." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "Think about it. That's all I'm saying. We have options, and your happiness matters to me as much as mine does." That night, Josie lay awake long after Zach's breathing had deepened into sleep in the next room. His willingness to uproot his life for her dreams moved her deeply, but something about it didn't sit right. The ranch was part of who he was, the lines of his face reflected in the contours of the land, his steady nature mirrored in the changing seasons of the valley. By morning, she had made her decision. At breakfast, she placed Mrs. Holloway's letter on the table between them. "I've been thinking about this offer," she said as Zach looked up from his coffee. "And I'm going to decline." His brow furrowed. "Are you sure?" "I meant what I said, Josie. We could make a life in Cottonwood Springs if that's what you want." "It's not." She smiled, feeling certainty settle in her heart. "My dream of having a shop was about independence, about creating a secure future for myself, but I found something better here, a partnership, a true home." She reached across the table for his hand. "Besides, who says I can't sew here? There are ranches and farms all around with people who need clothes made and mended. I could start small, maybe even open a proper shop in a few years when the ranch is more established." The smile that spread across Zach's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You're sure, really sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she said honestly. "This is where I belong, with you." When June arrived, the valley was at its most beautiful. Wildflowers dotted the meadows with splashes of blue, yellow, and purple. The aspen leaves shimmered green and silver in the breeze, and the clear air carried the scent of pine and sage. On the first Saturday of the month, friends and neighbors gathered at the ranch for the wedding of Zachary Larson and Josie Moore. A minister rode in from the nearest town, and Samuel Moore gave his daughter away with proud tears in his eyes. Josie wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, embellished with pearl buttons from her mother's wedding gown. Zach, looking somewhat uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, waited for her on the porch of their cabin, which had been transformed with garlands of flowers and ribbons for the occasion. As they spoke their vows beneath a clear blue sky, with the mountains standing witness and their small community gathered around them, both felt the rightness of their unlikely journey from a desperate meeting in a sheriff's office to this moment of joyful commitment. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with fiddle music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. As twilight descended and lanterns were lit around the yard, Zach pulled Josie away from the festivities for a moment alone. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to the quiet side of the house. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box hand-carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "I've been working on this for months." Josie opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a ring, not the simple gold band he had given her when they'd officially become engaged, but something far more personal. The band was silver, twisted into an intricate pattern with a small but perfect sapphire at its center. "Zach, it's beautiful," she whispered. "Where did you get this?" "Made it," he said, a touch of pride in his voice. "The silver is from my brother's pocket watch," seemed fitting to include him somehow. "The stone came from a prospector who passed through last month. Traded it for a week's worth of meals and a new saddle blanket." Tears filled her eyes as she realized the thought and love that had gone into the gift. "It's perfect." He took the ring and slid it onto her finger beside her wedding band. "Not as perfect as you, Mrs. Larson." The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Larson, Josie Larson, it sounded right, felt right. "I love you," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I'm so glad you were in that saloon the day I got dragged into the sheriff's office." Zach smiled against her lips. "Best $50 I ever spent." From the yard came the sound of Samuel calling their names. "Time to cut the cake, you two. You can't hide from your own wedding party." Laughing, they rejoined their guests, hand in hand, stepping together into the future they had chosen, a future built not on desperate circumstances or obligation, but on love freely given and gratefully received. As the years passed, the Larson Ranch flourished under their joint care. The herd grew, the fields produced abundant hay, and the cabin expanded into a proper house with a wide porch where they would sit in the evenings, watching the sunset together. Josie established a small sewing business that gradually gained customers from surrounding ranches and nearby towns. Her wedding dresses became particularly sought after, and young women would travel considerable distances for her skillful hand and eye for detail. In their second year of marriage, their first child was born, a son they named William Samuel, after both their fathers. 2 years later came a daughter, Rose Marie, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady green eyes. A second son, James, completed their family 3 years after that. Through good years and lean ones, through blizzards that threatened the herd and droughts that tested their resilience, through illness and health, joy and sorrow, the bond between them only strengthened. What had begun as an impulsive act of kindness had grown into a love story that became legend in the territory, the tale of the bride, the sheriff, and the cowboy who claimed her with $50 and a heart full of courage. On their 20th anniversary, with their children nearly grown and the ranch a thriving enterprise, Zach and Josie stood on their porch at sunset, his arm around her waist as they surveyed their domain. "Any regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About staying here instead of opening that shop in town." Josie leaned into his embrace, thinking of the life they had built together, the home filled with love and laughter, the land tamed by their joint efforts, the children who embodied the best of both of them. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I was meant to be." As the last light faded from the western sky, stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue, she turned in his arms to kiss him properly, still moved after all these years by the man who had seen her worth when others saw only scandal, who had offered friendship when she needed it most, and whose love had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined that dusty afternoon in Cottonwood Springs. In the distance, their eldest son rode in from checking the north pasture. Their daughter called the younger children in for supper, and smoke rose from the chimney of the home they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, dream by shared dream. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, Josie knew with absolute certainty that home wasn't a place at all. It was this, the circle of Zach's arms, the legacy of their love, the life they had chosen together. It was, quite simply, everything.